Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, and hopefully I've got everything set up properly this time, because a couple of days ago, for some reason, my configuration wasn't set up properly when I logged in. But you should be able to hear me, and hopefully we've solved the problems associated with so much video freezing. But with that out of the way, today we're going to be talking about Fairtrade 37 years on. Before we get to that, I'd like to mention that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. And this is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. You can go there. If you're not a member, you can go click on the join button. And while I'm on that topic, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment and share to grow the awareness of what it is that I'm doing here on Pod Save Chocolate with your community. You can also go to the live chat on YouTube or the comments on LinkedIn and Facebook if you have anything you want to say about this particular episode. A comment, a question, some sort of observation, just go into the comments. Let me know. I will get them up on screen and I will respond to them. And for every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together a post. And here is the post for today's episode. Right? It's a run of show. These things are not scripted. Because it gives me the opportunity to respond to things in real time, the comments and questions that you've got. I'm not sitting here reading a script, blah, 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 through the whole thing. Although sometimes I do have notes and I refer to my notes. With that, let's get on to today's episode. So number one, why am I doing this? Right? That's because in just about 6 weeks' time, we have September the 19th, Saturday, we have the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Harkin-Engel Protocol. And over the course of today and through the next 6 weeks, I'm going to be covering a number of topics that I think are related to the ideas which the Harkin-Engel Protocol was designed to bring to people's attention and to address the long-standing imbalance of power between big chocolate and cocoa farmers. So I think that's a really important thing to think about. The other one is that there is a connection. So in end of June, early July of 2001 was the first time I ever visited a fancy food show, the Summer Fancy Food Show in New York City. And there I met two influential people on my early journey in early path along the chocolate life. One of those was Gary Guittard, who was very, very encouraging. And, I spent a number of years going back to the fancy food show and sharing what it is that I had learned to show him that I was serious and to get feedback from him. And it was really, really important to me in those early years that I had that contact. But in that summer fancy food show, I also met Freddie Schilling, who is one of the founders of Dagoba Chocolate. And Dagoba Chocolate was probably the first chocolate marketing company. They didn't manufacture the mass that they were working with. The first chocolate company that I knew of that was selling organically certified, Fairtrade certified chocolate. And the Fairtrade certification that they used was Max Havelaar. And Max Havelaar is the first Fairtrade certified brand. They founded in 1988, 1989. I do have that on the list. Down here, it's in here somewhere. So it's important to understand. Actually, November 15th, 1988. So, we have September 19th, 2001 for the signing of Harkin-Engel, and then 12 years, a dozen years earlier, in November of 1988, we have the first Fairtrade certification mark, Max Havelaar, initially just for coffee, but shortly thereafter, they expanded that to include cocoa and tea. So there is this connection, right? But because everything is about me and everything revolves around me, between the ideas of fair trade and the ideas of the Harkin-Engel Protocol. And I wanted to use this episode to sort of ring in of a theme that I'm going to be introducing over the course of the next next 6 weeks or so. So I do have an episode already scheduled for Friday, September the 18th, which will be on the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Harkin-Engel Protocol. My main guest for this is going to be Terry Collingsworth of International Rights Advocates. Terry's been a guest on the Chocolate Life Live and Pod Save Chocolate in the past, but I just got too late to update the post. But I will add is that Mickey Mastrati, who is the producer of The Dark Side of Chocolate and that related group of movies, is also agreed to be on the show. So it's going to be really fascinating. We're going to be looking at the history of Harkin-Engel. We're going to be looking at the efforts that have gone to hold the signatories accountable to their voluntary commitments under Harkin-Engel, and how the Dark Side of Chocolate and those related projects have had an influence on public perception of the problem. So I think this could be really cool, and I'm really, really happy to be able to announce that Mickey has agreed to join us for that episode. Listen, if you have any ideas for other people that you'd like to see on the episode, go put them in the comments. I would love suggestions for other people to be a part of that exploration, celebration in quotes, air quotes, but I think it would be really, really interesting. So with that all said, number one, let's go to the top of this post, and you'll notice that what I did is I put fair in quotation marks. And I have in the past said, Tony's Chocolonely, you use the word, annual fair reports, right, as a way of emotionally loading things, right? So you're going in here and what you're reporting on is about fairness, right? And I think I wanted to follow up on that, that meme by putting fair in quotes here, because one of the questions I've consistently asked over the course of the last decade or more is who gets to decide what is fair, right? And so let's talk about how that leads in to a lot of what it is that I want to talk about for the rest of today's episode. So number one is who gets to decide what's fair, and can we use the word fair to emotionally front load things? So people are going to think, yes, it's a good thing to be. Who would say it's not a good thing to be fair, right? And isn't fair trade better than unfair trade? Absolutely. But I'm not going to be discussing whether or not is fair trade good or bad, right? That's not the discussion I want to get to today. That may surprise many of you who know me. I have publicly said that I think that fair trade is a form of economic imperialism and socially acceptable economic imperialism. It's where a group of people in the quote unquote global north tell a group of people in the quote unquote global south what it is that's fair. We're going to ask you to pay to adopt our ideas of what it is that's fair, but we're not going to take on market risk associated with the adoption of our beliefs. You're going to have to figure out how to sell your cocoa or your coffee or whatever it is that has been certified, but you have to pay us for the privilege of putting the fair trade label on what you're doing. So I think it's a form of economic imperialism. I'm not going to talk about that today at all. What I want to do is I want to ask what I think is a better question, is can we use fair trade's own published data, its own studies, and its own price mechanisms around the idea, have the certification premiums move the needle on farmer livelihoods enough to justify what farmers and cooperatives pay to say certified, right? So that's an interesting one. Rather than saying fair trade good, fair trade bad, this is an external critique, which is based on some sort of ethical, moral framework that each one of us has. I could look at this and say it's not ethical, it's not ethically justified. Someone else might say, yes, it absolutely is a moral thing to do. And these are statements which are based in ideas which are not falsifiable. However, what we're going to do is we're going to look today at an internal critique. Can we use their own published data, their own studies, their own mechanisms, and ask the question, have the certification premiums move the needle? And that is an internal critique not an external combinations. Take Fairtrade's numbers seriously and see where they break down, right, on their own terms. See, I say where they break down, which is actually I've already judged. I'm saying they do break down, and I should probably soften that to say to see if and where they break down on their own terms. So I will go back and change that after the episode is over. So the number one things I want to consider, right, are in bold here. So number one is the premium has real documented effects, but they are smaller than the marketing implies. And what we can do, oh, by the way, right, if you go down to the bottom, whoops, you don't need to see all of those. If you go down to the bottom of the post, what you'll do is you'll find a list of sources, right? And all the things I'm going to say here, or most of the things I'm going to say here, are based upon these sources. And so you'll see a link, to an article, and then you'll see a very, very short, tagline which says what this source is talking about, what it supports in terms of what it is I'm going to say here. So I think I just wanted to show that off right now because I'm going to go across. I'm going to mention some things, and there is support for them if you want to go find it. I think it's important to cite primary sources for where these ideas come from, not that I am just stating them without any supporting evidence. So Fairtrade's own 2021 household income study in Cote d'Ivoire found that if farmers captured the Fairtrade minimum price across all the cocoa they sold, the average household income would rise by roughly 9%, with about 25% of farmers projected to clear a living income and another half getting close. So that's interesting. It's a real number, right? This real number, which is, right, a quarter of farmers projected to clearing a living income and another half getting close. Those are, and that 9% is a real number, but it's also a highly conditioned one. And it turns out that condition is really important, right? And the condition is if farmers captured the Fairtrade minimum price on all volumes, which, as we'll see in other research, is not what happens in practice, right? Certified co-ops typically sell only a portion of their crop on fair trade terms. That's not the message, in my experience, which if you read fair trade marketing materials as opposed to their reports, that you will actually find, right? It's not something that they run across. What they'll do is they'll talk about successes. They don't talk about things that aren't quite successes or aren't or might actually be considered by some to be failures. Before we go there, we've got somebody watching on YouTube who gives me a thumbs up. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thumbs up on the video while you're watching would also be a great, not just a comment, but I'll take it both. Thank you very much. If you have some questions about what it is that I'm doing here, or you have some comments, please also put them into the live chat on YouTube or the comments on LinkedIn and Facebook, right? So the premium does have real documented effects, but the numbers are smaller than the marketing replies. So the research that they publish says one thing. That research gets run through the PR mill, and what reaches the general public is a softened, equivocated version of what is in the research. Really important. So the other thing is that the compliance cost isn't evenly distributed, and it's rising. So there's a 2023 Confectionery News special report. It's down below in the sources. Cites a Colombian cooperative exec who gives the following breakdown. Just general certification can cost 10 to 15% of a cooperative's entire budget, which is a lot. A single line item that's going to take 10 to 15% of your annual budget, and it's called the cost of certification, right? Right. However, the deforestation and EUDR compliance specifically, right, if the co-op already has Polygon and farmer data, consumes an additional 5 to 10% of the budget, right? So I updated this morning because it wasn't entirely clear. I mean, I was using the numbers imprecisely. But what that says is that somewhere between 15% to 25% of a cooperative's budget can be consumed in compliance activities associated with being both Fairtrade certified and EUDR compliant with EUDR compliance, with EUDR compliance at this point pretty much non-negotiable. That's a huge percentage of a budget. And right, if the co-op cannot sell 100% of its cocoa on fair trade terms, it means that the cooperative is bearing the burden of those costs in a way for which there is no compensation. And so does it make sense economically? I'm not answering that question. That's something for every cooperative, every producer of cocoa, and every buyer of cocoa to decide for themselves, right? But it's also important to understand that fair trade's own oversupply admission, right, is worth sitting with too. The organization, so Fair Trade, acknowledged a large oversupply of fair trade certified cocoa against declining buyer demand following the 2019, and that's an important date, 2019, 7 years ago. That's well before the run up in prices in 2024 and 2025, right? So we want to keep that date in mind. So there was in 2019 an increase in the minimum price and the premium. And what that meant was that there was less demand for more expensive cocoa, right? And that a meaningful share of certified farmers are doing all the compliance work and not getting the premium at all because there are no buyers for their cocoa on fair trade terms, right? They do argue in the Cocoa Radar article, again, the Cocoa Radar article is in the notes below, that the 2022-2024 supply crunch, not certification fatigue, is what suppressed FT fair trade term sales. Their own spokesperson makes the exact point in that article. Conventional demand outpaced conventional supply, pulling buyers away from fair trade cocoa, right? However, we can apply Hitchens razor. There's a link to a Wikipedia article that describes what Hitchens razor is, which is basically anything which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence, right? So what Fairtrade is saying that there was a causal relationship in 2024 around the supply crunch and there being fewer buyers for fair trade cocoa. The burden is on Fairtrade to prove that claim, and they actually haven't met it. They assert it, right? But there's no data that are provided to back that up. Now, colloquially, the first part of it, there was a supply crunch, right? Right. But the second half of it, right, what has not been, right? So there's no actual data on the record that says the reason why this happened is not a part of what it is they're talking about. There are one or two colloquial references, particularly a Swiss buyer by the name of Pronatec, whom I know from my work with Felklin. Pronatec was a big supplier of cocoa for Felklin, but just because you have one anecdotal reference, the plural of anecdote isn't evidence. So you'd need a much broader, a much larger number of cases to be able to make the claim that there is a causal relationship between the two, right? But here we are in 2026. So if you think about the context of the pricing, that makes 2026 a strange moment to ask the question, right? Cocoa went from 2,500 a ton, more or less, in early 2023 to 12,000 at the April 2024 peak, then crashed back towards 6,000 and below, right? And so now we're talking about the fair trade minimum price. The entire safety net premise of the system was irrelevant for most of that window because the market price flew past it. When the market price is $10,000 a metric ton, the fact that the fair trade minimum price is 3,000 is meaningless because, well, it may or may not be it depends on where the farmer is located. The fair trade minimum, the living living income differential, the living income reference price, and things like that are more more aligned with the government cocoa organizations like the Cocoa Bot in Ghana than they are, for example, in Ecuador. And so the fair trade minimum price has a different effect for different producing countries. But for most of the run-up in prices, the moment cocoa hit $6, $7, $8, $9, $10,000 a ton, the fair trade minimum price was essentially meaningless. Fair trade has raised its conventional minimum by 45% to $3,500 a metric ton. That's before the premium, effective in October 26. So in about August, September, and about 2 months, a number that would have been meaningless during the 2024 spike, and may or may not matter depending on where the market sits in October, right? So I took a look just before we went live this morning, and the closing spot cash price for cocoa on the ICE US exchange closed at $5,200 a metric ton on yesterday, which means this $3,500 a metric ton, not including the premium, not including the living income differential. What is it? $400 a metric ton is right now 34 plus, 40. It's sitting well below $5,200 a metric ton, right? And so if people are right, it's meaningless at the moment because the market price is well above what the fair trade minimum and the premiums are going to be. And there's another typo I need to figure. And so we have this question. So is it a good thing? Should we be sad? Should we be meh? What should we do? Should I be surprised? What is it that's going on here? Okay. And again, what I want to do is I want to point out that this is not fair trade good, fair trade bad. That what I'm doing is I'm taking a look at some of the numbers. And, as I have started doing, I published this yesterday. I let it sit for 8 hours or something like that. And I went back and did some fact check runs about it. So I said, against this source data, I have written this. Tell me, am I giving a fair presentation? Are there ways I can steelman what it is that I'm talking about? Have I misrepresented any of what it is that I'm saying? And so I did update this post just before I went live this morning to address some of those issues. So there are a bunch of really, I think, in addition to the question of, which I posed at the top, right? Using Fairtrade's number, own published data, have the certification premiums move the needle on farmer livelihoods enough to justify what farmers pay to remain certified. And this is another issue which needs to be addressed. I mean, it's something that I saw in Peru a lot when I was there between 2013 and 2017, is that many cooperatives had multiple certifications, but the cooperative wasn't paying the certification. There was some other non-governmental organization that was paying for the certifications. And that took the whole, it skewed the price of cocoa internally because they weren't actually fully factoring, in conversations that I had with some of the people who were running the cooperatives, they just weren't considering the cost of certification when it came to figuring out what the price of the cocoa should be, because those costs were being borne by some other organization. It wasn't one that they saw hit their bottom line in the same way. So it's important to understand that question, and that's where this critique is coming from. Okay, so a couple of questions. When Fairtrade cites a 9% income increase, is that the numbers the farmers are actually seeing, or the numbers they would see under a best case volume assumption that does not always hold true? And we see that equivocated. It's, if, right, we'd see, right, something else. And so it's a best case volume assumption that doesn't always hold true. So we need to go take a look at this, and this would be a filter that you might want to look at the numbers that Fairtrade publishes and other organizations that also report on this that are using more than just internal fair trade data in order to be able to generate the numbers, right? So who absorbs the cost of staying certified when a cooperative cannot sell all of its bean on fair trade terms? Is it built into the premium math, or is it sunk cost for cooperatives? And part of what this talks to is, if you want to be a successful certified cooperative, how much cocoa do you need to produce, right? At what sell-through level? So you could say, okay, we're going to produce, 100 metric tons of cocoa per year, right? But we're going to assume that we're only going to get the premium on 40% of the cocoa, right? And so the income we're going to get on that 40% of cocoa is going to cover the cost of certification, right? And labor internally in the cooperative in order to be able to make sure you have to have somebody who's looking at records and making sure that you're in compliance, right? So is it built into the premium math, or is it a sunk cost cooperative for cooperatives? And I think that depends a lot on the cooperative, how big they are and how sophisticated they are. I've seen ones where it is not built into the premium math. They haven't got the how much of our cocoa do we need to sell at the fair trade certified price in order to cover all of the sunk costs for paying for the certification, the fees, right, and then covering the cost of labor, right? How much work do we need to do? Somebody in the cooperative we're paying, whose job it is to make sure that all the records are kept properly and we're in compliance. But that is a really, really important question, because in my experience, that the answer to this question is one which varies cooperative to cooperative. And it could be good in some years and it could be worse in others, because you might have a big buyer who buys a lot one year and the next year they're not buying another price. So, hey, this is from Mike at Encore Coffee and Chocolate in Kansas City, Missouri. And Mike says, FT in the coffee world is out of touch. They announced today they were raising the fair trade pricing to $2 a pound. The commodity market is at $3.32, and most specialty roasters like yourself pay 2 times the commodity price. Mike, this is exactly the point that I was making right up here, when fair trade is raising the minimum by 45% to $3,500 a ton, right? Effective in October, right? But the commodity price, the spot cash price today, is at $5,200 a metric ton. So this is, and I'm going to guess that if you're buying specialty cocoa beans, that you're paying more than that per metric ton right now. So this is the commodity cocoa price. The bulk cocoa price is not the specialty cocoa price. So, but when people say, oh my gosh, the fair trade raised the floor, the minimum, and then there's the premium on top of it, right? There's a sense that, yay, it must be fair, right? But people aren't actually going the next step and saying, okay, what is the market doing right now? So that's not the narrative that fair trade wants anybody to explore very deeply. So who absorbed the cost of staying certified? Will a fair trade certified co-op just say, thank you, it's not worth the effort, when it gets to the point where they can no longer financially support it? That would be really a challenge to do, because once they drop the certification, recertification it's less expensive to remain certified than it is to recertify, to start from scratch. For example, if I want organic certification, it takes 3 years from when I'm applying to be able to make sure that everything happens. Everything that needs to happen to be organic is in place. It doesn't take 3 years in fair trade certification. But, if you let your certification lapse, I don't think you can recertify. You have to start the certification process all over. And that would be more expensive. If you have to start the certification process all over, that would be more expensive, right? So number 3 question, has certification 37 some odd years later changed the structural position of a cocoa farmer relative to a trader or processor. Spoiler alert, no, it hasn't changed the power imbalance, the structural position between a cocoa farmer slash cooperative relative to a trader, big buyer, processor. Or has it created a parallel compliance economy? Yes, it has created, spoiler alert, it has created a parallel compliance economy that primarily benefits the better resource cooperatives that can absorb the cost of compliance paperwork. And the answer is yes. I mean, if you definitely, if you are a bigger, better resourced, more professionally run cooperative, then you are definitely going to be able to take advantage of that. And this is something that I saw when I was in Peru in 2015. I was spending some time up in Piura while I was helping to develop Solbeso and visiting the cooperative Norandino. And one of the things that Norandino did is it had full-time professional management. And as a result of that full-time professional management, they're very entrepreneurial, by the way. Over the course of several years, they have been able to get a lot of USAID grants and a lot of other grant monies, which supported a lot of really, really interesting things that they were doing, both in coffee and cocoa. They also had doing sugar and other commodities. And so it was a really interesting case where the better resource cooperatives can absorb the cost of compliance paperwork better than smaller ones, less well-resourced cooperatives. And that also includes, culturally, are they entrepreneurial in spirit, right? Or how are they approaching, oh my gosh, I now have all this cocoa, how do I go market that cocoa? And I had that conversation with a gentleman by the name of Lauren Stoddard. Lauren, I first met in 2013 in Peru at the Salon du Chocolat when I went there for the first time in Lima. And he oversaw all USAID money that went into Peru for the program, which was working to convert cocoa farmers into cocoa farmers. And one of the reasons why the Salon del Cacao y Chocolate was funded by USAID in conjunction with Minagri and the Ministry of Agriculture and DeVita, which is the Health and Human Services agency within the Peruvian government at the time. The reason why the salon was set up is because they had all this cocoa that they had produced under this program, but they had no market for the cocoa. And so they invested millions of dollars of more to create a mechanism that would raise the level of Peru in the cocoa buying world so that they could sell primarily CCN 51, which is the cocoa of choice, the varietal of choice that they planted during this time. But it is this question, has certification 30 plus years on changed the structural relationship between a cocoa farmer, right? Has it fixed the power imbalance? Has it addressed the power imbalance that exists between a smallholder farmer or a cooperative relative to a trader or process? And the answer is no. What it has done is it's created a parallel compliance economy. That's my thought, right? I want you to go and ask yourself that question, do some research, take a look at all the documents, all the things that I point to at the bottom of the page. There's a lot of reference material down there if you're interested in the topic, and ask yourself that question: who benefits, and who benefits the most? Because I think it's important. And what we want to do, as I stated at the top, is use Fairtrade's own published numbers to try to figure out what the answer to that question is, right? So, fourth question we might want to look at is Fairtrade is only one certification among several. You got Rainforest Alliance, Organic, UTS before the Rainforest Alliance merger. That's years ago, so we'll just call them Rainforest Alliance now. Does stacking certifications multiply the compliance burden without multiplying the benefit? And so, again, well, this requires going beyond, Fair Trade International's reporting, because you have to look at the reporting of Rainforest Alliance, the various organic certification bodies. We have a new one coming up, Regenerative Organic. I mean, there's all sorts of certification. But I have been to cooperatives in Peru where they, not only have they got, Rainforest Alliance, they've got organic, they've got fair trade, they have a halal certification, they'll have a kosher certification, they might have a Demeter, which is a biodynamic certification for some of their cocoa. So the question becomes, does having more certifications result in higher sales? There may be. So again, I think that the more organized you are, and if you have the ability to go to some sort of NGO and to say to the NGO, what we'd like you to do is you'd like to cover the cost of certification for us, so we don't have to back out those costs out of sales, then the answer is yes. If you're does stacking certification multiply the compliance burden? The answer is yes, it does multiply the compliance burden. Each one of these certifications measures the same sort of thing, but they use different metrics. And so you have to fill out different paperwork, and they want different things on that paperwork. So it does multiply. It may not be double it or triple it. It might be a multiplier of 1.2 or 1.3. So there is a multiplying effect, but does it multiply the benefits at the same rate? And the answer is, again, I think it depends on the nature of the co-op, the size of the co-op, what does exist. I mean, there are limitations if the cooperative is in Ghana compared with if the cooperative is in a place like Ecuador or Peru, just because of government trade organizations like COCOBOD, which control what happens. So there is a difference. And so it's really difficult to answer a question like this, right, in a way that applies broadly across the entire world. You have to look at it country by country. But this is one of the places, in my opinion, where checklist certification, and it's either pass fail, right? So it's a binary. You either pass the certification or you don't pass the certification, and it depends upon the checklist, which is done. So I would caution everyone to think about trying to find a one size fits all. Again, this may work in one producing country, it may not work in the same economics might not work in another producing country. But the overall question is, does stacking certifications multiply the client's burden? By definition, it has to, right? Does it also multiply the benefits? Hopefully, if I put 3x the effort in, do I get 4x the return? That would be lovely. But if I put 3x in, am I getting at least 3x the benefits? So it's not an easy question, but it is a question that needs to get asked, which is one of the reasons why I put it there. I want to say thank you to Prabha Sharma, who is from India. Who's saying nice information. Thank you very much. I appreciate the shout out with that. And then, so W verification launch, the WFTO guaranteed fair trade label and independently audits the whole business against WFTO. So what I'm going to say here is something that I have my own opinion, right? You can think about this difference. Right, which is we have here a problem which is not unique in what I'm going to call the certification industrial process, and it is extended to all voluntary standards organizations. So one of the challenges which has led to, for example, the kicking down the road. Right. So when Harkin-Engel was signed in 2001, the goal was to reduce illegal labor in the cocoa supply chain to zero within 5 years. Right. And when they realized they weren't going to get to that goal in 5 years, they said, well, give us another 10 years and it'll be 70%, right, reduction, or we'll reduce, 70% reduction, not reduce to 70%. Right? This is a problem with voluntary standards where the people who are doing the oversight are in fact the organizations themselves. So while the World Cocoa Foundation was not set up, because it was incorporated before Harkin-Engel was signed, right? It took over the Harkin-Engel. It set up the International Cocoa Initiative, and it turns out that if you look at the governance rules, right, how governance is structured and who is responsible for what, the fox is guarding the henhouse, right? And there are no independent auditors. So WFTO verification, World Fair Trade Organization, I'm assuming what that means, guaranteed fair trade label, independent, they're just too close, right? So WFTO verification launched the WFTO guaranteed fair trade label, right? So it's not in, I don't think it's independent. I would have to look at their governance, right? Their charter documents that says this is how we run the organization and this is what we're doing. We need to look at the money. Who is funding all of these organizations and where does it come from, right? And to understand how independent they are. But having said that, thank you for pointing out. What I will do is I will go and do a separate fact check using WFTO verification, right? And what I will do is I will go and do a fact check against everything that I've written in this document and say, okay, go and take a look at what WFTO verification is and how it supports, steelmans, or undermines what it is that I'm saying. So I will go do that. So you are consumers. So working with a fair trade certified cooperative gold standard, right, is the watchdog in the supply chain. As the WFTO member is the watchdog in the supply chain. That's exactly the problem, right? You have the fox guarding the henhouse. So you've got a right? It needs to be a truly independent organization, right? And that independent organization probably needs to be rotated out every 3 years or so. A new organization that doesn't have institutional capture. So, all right, right? So you say that, all right, totally independent is member organization, one of the 4 networks that developed the fine criteria in 2001. So, right? So, all right, so what I'm going to do, right? Thank you very much, Evzy, who's watching on YouTube. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go take all of your comments. I am going to go and use them as a source to go fact check against everything that I've written here. And I promise that what I will do, right, is I will put some analysis of this in the comments to this post on the Chocolate Life afterwards. Totally independent as member organization. I don't know, based on your description of them, I don't know that they are in fact totally independent. But fair criticism of what it is, right? Okay, right. It is totally audited independently. Gotcha. All right, I'll go take a look, right? But what I will say is that is an important criterion. And I want to understand what it is that they're auditing, right? So my feeling is that the whole enterprise of quote unquote fair trade is bankrupt, right? Because the organization that's saying you need to pay us money to get our certification is not undertaking any market risk, right? That if you're gonna certify this stuff, you should make sure that 100% of the cocoa that is grown under certified terms is sold under certified terms, right? And to go from 36%, which is about the average sell-through rate right now, depending on who you talk to, right, is a problem. So I don't care if it's at some level, I don't care if it's independently certified. I think the whole endeavor, right, has got some structural problems associated with it that this kind of auditing may fall short. I don't know the questions that they're asking, but you've made a really, really important point here. It's not something that I took into account when I took a look at this. What I will do is I will totally go and I will go and take a look at all of the things that you've said here, right? And I will respond to that. What I will also say is that when I put the comment in the post on the Chocolate Life, what I will do is I will go to the YouTube channel and put a comment in the after the live chat stream, I'll put a comment to the post, so what you'll know that I have added this to my post on the Chocolate Life. And I'm also sort of curious. You say you're working with a Fairtrade certified cooperative. I'd like, if you can share with that, I'd like to know what it is. And it sounds like you've got a fair amount of experience and background. And so right now you're sitting behind an account name that I don't know who you are. So I would really be interested in having the conversation. And if you want to be my guest on a live stream in the future, and we can go and critique everything that I've said here, let me know, and I'm happy to have you on as a guest. So if you think that would be helpful. So next point, 25 years after Harkin-Engel and 37 after Max Havelaar, what does it say that both a voluntary industry pledge and a market-based certification premiums are still being defended on the promises of future results rather than historically delivered ones? That's I think a valuable question to ask. And then I'm just looking at some more formatting stuff here. Has Fairtrade ever published a study that failed to show improvement, or published a review questioning whether the research pipeline itself is structured to only measure success scenarios? I believe it's a fair criticism of the process. I don't know of any Fairtrade study that has been ever published. And I did a meta-analysis to try to find these things, right? I don't think that there's ever been a Fairtrade study that has been published that says our bad, right? We're not doing what we said we would do, right? And here's the reason why, and here's the reason why, and here's the reason why, right? Why? Because in some extent, they're not sustainable as businesses. They are not sustainable just on the certification fees, the licensing fees that they get. They are dependent on donors and from individuals, from governments, from non-governmental organizations. And if you're not showing that you're delivering what you're claiming you're delivering, it has an impact on funding. So these are 6 questions that I have about it. I link to something because I said I did some additional fact checking, right? A group called the International Institute for Sustainable Development, their 2022 Global Marketing Report. Now, I did say that one date we wanted to keep in mind was 2019, which is a date around some reporting which supported this particular post. 2019 is a long time ago, right? But what we have here is I'm looking for things that are more modern, and the 2022 Global Market Report is one of the most recent sort of by an organization that is a watchdog in the industry. If you want to go and take a look at it, you can click on this link, right? And you'll go to the page where you can download this report. Right. So I downloaded this report and used it as a document to fact check it against other things. And what I found out is that the IISD's cocoa specific reporting hasn't been updated since 2022. Right. And so it misses the entire price run up in 2024. Anything more recent is coming from Fairtrade's internal numbers or other sources, not ISD. So it's fair to describe ISD as the source mechanism, the 2019 price hike, oversupply, sell-through gap, but not for any current sell-through figure, which relies on Fairtrade's published reporting. So there's, is it 30%, 33%? What is the sell-through rate? Right. It's not coming from IISD, which is a source for some of the other claims that I'm making here as a bit of background source material. And I have downloaded previous IISD cocoa market reports and have done the version over version, that they're not annual. The version over version changes, what are the trend lines that we might be able to get. So I want to close, but before I do, a couple Principles and values cannot be monetized. Well, why are we doing fair trade? We have principles and values, and the whole idea of fair trade is that by farmers adopting principles and values, those principles and values can be monetized. Right? And I don't know why signing up to the 10 fair trade principles is not signing up for principles and values that can't be monetized. So there's a circular logic there that I don't understand. If the whole idea of signing up for fair trade is that by adopting fair trade's principles and values, you're going to make more money. That's the basic concept behind fair trade, right? Not just in cocoa, but in any agriculture and other commodity. It's what rainforest is all about. So it's about improved farmer lives and livelihoods more broadly, not just there's more than one way to monetize things. So I don't understand this. Why signing up for the 10 fair trade principles? Well, the whole idea is signing up for them and paying for them, right? Is that you get more stuff. I worked with a coffee cooperative that was fair trade certified. It was a WFDO guaranteed fair trade importer bidder. And yes, there is a story here. Just DM me. I will go and do that, right? But here is another point that I want to make, right, about this, and I will DM you, right? So, which is, one example doesn't prove the entire ecosystem. Just because it worked for the cooperative that you worked for doesn't mean that success works for all coffee cooperatives. And just because your coffee cooperative worked, it doesn't mean that all cocoa cooperatives work. It worked in your particular context. And we need to understand what are all of the factors associated with this, right, that led to its success, right? What are the best practices? And unfortunately, there are lots of social and organizational issues, which mean that some of those ideas might be transferable. So principles and values cannot be monetized. Integrity. I'm not sure that I understand what you mean by that one word remark. And we're unfortunately like 5 minutes to the end of the episode. So I would prefer to have a conversation with you offline. And what we can do is we can figure out what you mean by this. I'm not prepared. So roasting coffee in country that grew it. Now, doing value-added production is a wonderful thing, right? So if you have the resources to invest in a roasting and bagging infrastructure suitable for export, and you have the ability to market not only in country, but also to export it, that added value is a great thing. Not all cooperatives want to do that. I saw this in Peru. Lots of cooperatives wanted to make chocolate and export it, and they didn't have the expertise to manufacture chocolate that could be sold on the international market, right? And so it works in some circumstances. It doesn't work in all circumstances, right? But we need to understand that as that dynamic of thing. All right. Anyway, it didn't work. Why we closed? Absolutely, it is a challenge. I mean, it's not just making the chocolate, right, or roasting the coffee. It's about marketing it, right, and then finding buyers for it. So it's anyway. It's much more complicated than that. And while I appreciate all the additional comments that are going on, it's pulling me away from what I want to close up with. So let's have that conversation. I will DM you later, and we'll figure it out, right? But let's go and think about some other things that are going on here. It's not just the fair trade minimum price. It's not just the premiums that are paid, but we have this thing called the living income differential and the living income reference price, right? And the point that I want to make about that is price floors without supply management make all of these problems worse, right? It's not a criticism of fair trade in isolation. It's an observation that criticizes the whole raise the price strategy across every mechanism. living income differential, minimum price, living income reference price simultaneously, right? And the problem is that none of these three addressed demand, right? And it is oversupply, undersupply, oversupply. It is the relationship between supply and demand, right? Which determines not just price, but how much of my commodity can I sell at what price, right? So I said at the beginning, internal critique, not external condemnation, right? But it shows the dysfunction, right, that I'm pointing to isn't fair trade specific. It's what happens whenever you regulate the price without regulating the volume. So you've got a free market, quote unquote, in one aspect of it, right? But then you've got your thumb on the scale in another aspect. You're trying to say, here is the price, but that price is the same whether you produce, 50,000 tons or 100,000 tons or 250,000 tons, right? Which doesn't make sense in a market that is where the price is determined on an open exchange, right? Where you have people taking short positions, taking long positions as part of complex hedging strategies to manage risk. Those mechanisms are contradictory, sort of right on their face. And this is one of the challenges, right? Which is if you do not address demand, you only work on price, you're setting the entire system up for failure, number one, irrespective of what the fair trade principles are, right? Or the principles of the organization, the ethics, the ideas of the organization are, right? Anytime you're putting your thumb on one part of the scale and you're not exerting similar kind of effort, right, to balance the other part of the scale, you're setting yourself up for failure. And that's one of the things, it's a major reason, I think, why fair trade and similar sustainability programs, governance structures, set them up to fail. And it's this governance structure issue which turns out to be, I think, really, really important, right? Which is if the board of directors of a nonprofit organization can quietly change the goalposts. So, for example, if the World Cocoa Foundation and the International Cocoa Initiative can go and sort of independently say, we failed to move our target, reach our target of reducing, child labor 100% in 4 years in West Africa. So we're going to say, give us another 5 years and it'll be down to 70%, right? But there was no sign off. Harkin-Engel didn't sign off on that change, right? When they failed to meet their guidelines, there were no consequences for not meeting the guideline. There was no consultation with the people who authored the Harkin-Engel protocol, U.S. Congress, not just Harkin-Engel, right? To say, you know what, no harm, no foul, right? Just continue on as you were. And when they were given, right, no pushback on making the change, when they came up to their next voluntarily set deadline, they said, oops, our bad, we couldn't do it, let's push it down the road, right? And then every time, then it's now been nearly 25 years since signing and 20 years since their first deadline. And if anything, the problem is worse than it was when it was back in 2001. And so I think it's really important not to take at face value the claims that are being made, right? And it's not good enough to just say fair trade bad, right? Which, right? I think it's, again, socially acceptable economic imperialism, right? Any fair trade regime or any regime that says, hey, right, I'm going to say this in the crassest way that I possibly can. Hey, I'm a white person in the global north telling brown people in the global south what fair is, right? And I've never been to that country. I've never set foot on a coffee farm. I've never set foot on a cocoa farm. I don't know how much hard work it is to do these things, right? But I got some new ethics. I got some new values. I got some idea that's what's fair. And here's a checklist. And we're going to ask you to pay for the privilege of filling out our checklist. And we're going to give you a thumbs up or thumbs down whether we have some independent auditor who says, yep, they actually met everything on the checklist that they have to do, right? my opinion, and I've stated this in these terms for at least the last 3 to 5 years, what's going on. But in this particular case, what I wanted to do is I want to urge you, right, to go dive below the level, below the surface, and say, look at the numbers, the actual numbers that are published by the organization. Look at their numbers, right? I think take them with a grain of salt if you can find some independent reporting, like the IISD, in addition to doing a cocoa report, does a coffee report, right? And go find out, oh, right, are they actually making the claims, the changes that they claim that they are making, right? Or is the way they're reporting about them focusing on successes, right, while completely ignoring or glossing over greenwashing, might be another term, the failures. Just a thought, right? This is what I do on a regular basis, and I want to thank Evzy on YouTube for giving me some additional sources to go look at and compare, fact check against everything that I've done here. And I will make a promise to do that over the course of the next 2 to 3 days and publish things on the post on the Chocolate Life, as well as to make a note on the YouTube channel in the community tab. If so click on the subscribe button in the community tab, or and as a comment to this post, because listen, right? I mean, this is something that didn't come up in the relatively narrow context that I was using to research this topic, and I'm happy to go and expand my search because I don't want to. I want to believe as many true things as possible, and as few untrue things as possible, and that's where my exploration is. And I hope it's what you're getting out of this episode as well. This is the exercise that I really enjoy, so I have fun doing it, right? And I want to thank all the members of the Chocolate Life, my premium members, and the regular members of the Chocolate Life for their support. Your support makes this channel possible and keeps the Chocolate Life on the air. If you're not a member, you can go over to thechocolatelife.com. And click on the join button. There's always a free membership. There has been since 2008. If you do have the financial resources to support the work that I'm doing, I will always say thank you very much for being a Chocolate Life member. And with that, I want to say, hey, tomorrow is the 1st of August. And to remind yourselves that if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you just might be doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao.